What's the point of getting all worked up over marrying a high school dropout?
My sister, who claims to be an elite, spoke in a triumphant voice. Ever since I introduced my fiancé to her, she has been insulting him. But I've reached my limit. You better not regret it once you know the truth. I'm Catherine. I'm 29 and about to marry my fiancé. Life will change a lot after getting married. I quit my job at the trading company and am now preparing for the wedding. My fiancé, Tom, is a very gentle person. He gets along well with my parents too. I think it's largely because Tom and I met through my dad's work. My dad is the president of a small but beloved local business.
Thanks to the support of the local folks, our business runs smoothly.
That's my dad's favorite phrase, and I respect him for it.
I never thought Tom would end up marrying my daughter.
Seeing my dad mutter with a happy smile doubles the joy of the wedding. It's supposed to be the springtime of my life, but
Catherine, are you there?
my parents are both at work during weekdays. The sound of footsteps echoed through the houses where only I was home alone. Hi, Julia.
There you are. It's been a while.
Julia, my sister, suddenly appeared at our house in the quiet afternoon. My sister, 2 years younger than me, lives alone away from our parents' house.
This house is so old-fashioned. Dad's a president, so he should spend some money on remodeling.
Julia threw her bag on the couch and looked around the living room in annoyance. Mom and Dad are both practical people. Besides, it's not even 20 years old yet.
You're stingy too, sis.
Julia scrunched her face in annoyance as usual. She has always loved flashy, glamorous things. When she was little, she'd demand frequent overseas trips or brand-name clothes. As she grew, she insisted on attending an all-girls private middle and high school just because she liked the uniforms, putting our parents in a tough spot. We weren't exactly struggling for money, but our family had a practical approach to finances. So, at first, my parents opposed sending Julia to a private school with incredibly high tuition and uniform costs. But as soon as they said no, Julia started crying and throwing a fit. In the end, our parents agreed, not wanting the houses destroyed.
You should have just listened to me in the first place.
Seeing Julia perk up instantly after getting their approval really surprised me. Who did she inherit that from? Seeing Julia sitting around in flashy clothes, even now makes me wonder.
Huh? What are you talking about?
No, nothing. Just talking to myself.
You sound so old.
Julia exaggeratedly pinched her nose, looking entirely relaxed. Julia, did you come for a reason today?
Oh, yeah. So, I heard you're getting married? What's your fiancé like?
Julia leaned in, her eyes gleaming with mischief. What do you mean, what's he like? He's just a normal guy.
What college did he graduate from?
Without missing a beat, Julia fired her question, and I almost burst out laughing, thinking, there it is. After attending the private all-girls school, she went on to a prestigious private college. She's incredibly proud of her education. Every time she meets someone, she has to ask, "Where did you graduate from?" It's almost a hobby, asking about people's backgrounds just to show off.
So, which university did your fiancé graduate from?
Annoyed at my reluctance to answer, she asked again, her frustration mounting. My fiancé didn't graduate from college. Julia gasped dramatically at my answer.
What? He dropped out of college?
No, not exactly.
Huh? What do you mean? Don't tell me.
My fiance. Tom's highest level of education is high school, but he's.
No way. I can't believe it.
Without even hearing me out, Julia screamed. What's the point of lying about something like this? So, he's a high school graduate, but
I've never even seen a high school grad before. I can't believe it. No way. I kinda wanna meet one now.
ignoring what I was saying, Julia kept making a fuss on her own, which irritated me a bit. But I gave up on the conversation, knowing it was typical of her. All right, all right. My fiance's education has nothing to do with you, Julia.
Yes, it does. It totally does. My boyfriend and I are elites. I mean, we're intellectual leaders.
Julia, all riled up, compared her boyfriend, whom she met in college, and tried to use some fancy words. Intellectual leaders? Do you even know what that means?
Well, I mean, people like my boyfriend and me are called intellectual leaders.
And what kind of people are those? Trying to quiet my annoyingly loud sister by digging deeper, as expected, she got tongue-tied.
The details don't matter. Anyway, we're super important and really smart people.
I couldn't help but laugh at Julia's incredibly immature explanation.
Ugh. You're always nitpicking over every little thing. The point is, my boyfriend and I went to a prestigious private college, and there's no way I'll accept having a high school grad in the family.
Julia crossed her arms, fuming. As I was about to argue back at her rudeness, she suddenly seemed to think of something, and then quickly switched to a calmer attitude.
Well, whatever. Anyway, I'm glad I got to see you. Later.
And just like when she arrived, she left suddenly. What's her deal? She's still like a tornado. I was relieved for the moment and went back to preparing for the wedding I was looking forward to, not giving much thought to why Julia, who never backs down, left so easily. And then the weekend arrived. It was the day for the wedding planning meeting that I'd been looking forward to. My fiance, Tom, and I were meeting directly at the church where the ceremony would take place. The church where we were getting married was a historic site, with the building listed as a historic church. The moment you stepped inside, the place's historic presence and the pure atmosphere made you want to stand up straight. I can't believe we get to have our wedding here. It feels like a dream. From behind me, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel.
Hey, Catherine.
My fiance, Tom, called out to me with a smile. Tom, thanks for taking the time, even though I know weekends are busy for you.
It's our special wedding, Catherine. Everyone was happy to let me take time off.
Hand in hand, Tom and I headed toward the office where the planner was waiting. Like every couple getting married, Tom and I poured our own touches into the ceremony. We planned to hold the ceremony in the church and then have the reception in a charming hall within the grounds. Both were high-class buildings, so we carefully selected sophisticated white gowns, colored dresses, bouquets, and more to match the elegance. And there was the food, wedding cake, table flowers. We wanted our guests to enjoy it too, so we made all our choices with great care. Ugh, but all the colored dresses are so gorgeous. Maybe I'll just layer them all.
That could work. It'd be quite a sight, like a peacock.
Tom, I was joking. You could at least laugh. Tom, a little clueless but incredibly gentle, never complained no matter how long it took me to make a decision.
You let me pick the venue, so I want everything else to be just the way you want it.
Hearing that made me feel all the more sure I wanted to spend my life with Tom. That was how our meeting, which had been smooth and peaceful, suddenly became clouded.
There you are. Knew I'd find you.
Oh, is that your sister and her high school grad fiancé?
I turned at the sound of loud footsteps and chatter to find Julia and a man I didn't recognize. Julia, what are you doing here?
I thought I'd come to support you during the wedding planning.
How do you even know when and where the meeting is? When I asked, stunned, Julia just laughed.
When I was at the house the other day, your planner was open on the table, and it was written right there.
Darn it. I deeply regretted it. I'd left all the wedding papers and my planner out on the living room table, forgetting about Julia's nosiness. So, who is this guy? I had a pretty good idea, but I asked about the neatly groomed man standing next to Julia.
This is my boyfriend. I mean, fiancé, Richard.
Nice to meet you, Catherine.
Hearing this man in an expensive-looking suit and an annoyingly smug smile call me Catherine caught me off guard. When did you get engaged?
Right after I visited home the other day. When I saw the venue brochures, I wanted to get married too.
You decided something like that on a whim? When she wants to do something, she acts immediately. I was dizzy from Julia's astonishing drive, and her fiancé, Richard, smirked confidently.
Well, for elites like us, I mean intellectual leaders, getting married is as easy as pie.
Hearing that, I knew he was definitely Julia's boyfriend. Someone who always talks about being an elite or having a prestigious education is just the kind of person Julia would get along with. I also understood why Julia had suddenly started using terms like intellectual leaders. She must have learned the term intellectual leaders from her fiancé and started using it to sound more impressive.
So, I'm also getting married at this church.
What? I was reflecting on them, but then Julia's words caught me off guard. It might be nice for sisters to use the same venue, but you'll pick a different date, right? Like a year later.
No way. I don't want to go after you, so I'll have my wedding before yours.
What are you talking about? Seeing me speechless, Julia laughed.
I mean, you're marrying a high school grad, right? There's no way I'm having my wedding after someone who settled for that.
What? Tom gently touched my shaking shoulder to calm me down.
Hey, both of you, calm down.
Oh, sorry, high school grad. We totally ignored you.
Despite being my fiancé, Julia clearly had no intention of being polite or even giving a proper greeting. But Tom responded to Julia's behavior with courtesy.
Nice to meet you. I'm Tom, Catherine's fiancé. So Julia, you're having your wedding before ours. But did you manage to get a reservation?
Julia looked down at gentle Tom and laughed smugly.
There's a waiting list. Just happened that a spot opened up a week before your date.
Yeah, checking if any good dates have cancellations is just common sense when choosing a venue.
Richard laughed along, a smirk plastered across his face. But Tom simply tilted his head slightly, looking puzzled.
Oh, a cancellation, huh? Well, in that case, I guess you can book it.
Tom mumbled as if to himself, and Julia and Richard laughed mockingly.
Your fiancé is just like I imagined, sis, kinda clueless, typical high school grad.
Hey, since you're a high school grad, you don't know calculus, right? Try saying sine, cosine, tangent.
I glared at Julia and Richard, who were laughing loudly and obnoxiously. That's enough. If you keep making a scene, get out. Julia saw me fuming with anger and exaggeratedly shrugged her shoulders.
Whoa, looks like you're getting cold feet about marrying a high school grad, huh, sis?
Don't marry out of desperation, Catherine.
I was exhausted from dealing with these two who wouldn't listen to reason. I had nothing more to say.
Well then, time to get what I came here for today.
Julia, still cheerful, started taking pictures of the wedding planning documents on the desk.
What are you doing? These are important documents for our wedding.
Tom tried to stop her, but Julia pushed him aside and continued taking photos.
I don't have much time until my wedding. You get that, right?
Julia's strange remark made me step closer to her. What do you mean? Why does having little time mean you need to take pictures of our documents?
It's too much trouble to plan everything from scratch, so I'm gonna copy yours.
Once again, I was at a loss for words. Is it possible to be left speechless this often in one's life?
This bouquet design looks nice too. And you're ordering the table flowers from here as well, huh?
The wedding cake is so stylish. Much more fitting for me, a graduate of a prestigious intellectual leaders only university, than for some high school grad groom.
Satisfied, Julia and Richard left noisily, just as they had arrived. This can't be. Getting married with the same decorations a week before us. This has to be a joke.
I think it's true that they're getting married at the church a week before us, but maybe they'll only use us as a reference.
Tom and I still wanted to believe that even those two could distinguish between right and wrong. I was used to being at the mercy of Julia's whims from way back. I felt bad for Tom, but I decided to let Julia and Richard have their wedding a week before ours. I also started thinking about how I needed to apologize to our relatives for the added burden of two sisters having weddings so close together. I got a call from a floral artist I found on social media who specializes in weddings. What? You got an order for the exact same design 1 week before my wedding. I had asked that artist to create a carefully designed bouquet and table flowers for my wedding. And because they received an order for the same design a week before my date, they called to confirm if it was a prank. Was the order placed by someone named Julia? I hesitantly asked over the phone, and the answer was yes. No way. A terrible feeling washed over me, and I quickly called the boutique where I had arranged to rent my wedding dress. Sure enough, every piece I was supposed to rent had been reserved by Julia for her wedding, 1 week before mine. I also called the bakery where I had ordered the wedding cake, and an order for the exact same cake had been placed for a week before my wedding. That girl. I can't believe she really copied everything. Fueled by anger, I called Julia.
Hello?
Julia answered immediately, her carefree voice only making me angrier from the start. Julia, did you copy our entire wedding plan?
Yeah. I told you, I don't have time to come up with everything from scratch, so I'm just copying.
Julia didn't sound the least bit guilty, and I retorted in a firm tone. I'll let it go that you're having the wedding at the same church, but don't copy the plan that Tom and I worked so hard on. And Julia's wedding was 1 week before mine. With the same dress, bouquet, and wedding cake, it would be Tom and me who ended up embarrassed. As I spoke seriously, Julia laughed mockingly.
There's something I wanted to say to you too, sis. I tried ordering the same stuff, but don't you think you're spending a little too much on the wedding?
How could you say that? Besides, That's not true. I've set a budget and stuck to it.
That's fine, but those kinds of expenses aren't for someone marrying a high school grad. You'll have all kinds of expenses to deal with later, you know?
I could practically see Julia's smug face as she laughed over the phone. Seeing I was speechless with anger, Julia continued triumphantly.
Remember, a wedding isn't the finish line. You're marrying a high school grad, so your whole life will be full of sacrifices.
Why do you have to say that?
The wedding plan was perfect for us elites. I mean, intellectual leaders. If you don't want it to overlap, maybe you should consider a more modest venue and plan.
No way. There's a reason I can't give up the venue, and that plan was one that Tom and I put our hearts into. Before I could finish, Julia laughed happily, interrupting me.
What's the point of putting your heart into a marriage with a high school grad?
Julia, you. Before I could finish, Julia hung up on me, leaving me fuming as I paced around the living room for a while. Once I'd calmed down a bit, I called my fiancé, Tom.
Hey, what's going on?
Hearing Tom's gentle voice almost brought tears to my eyes. Tom, actually, Julia. I explained to Tom how Julia had copied every part of our wedding.
I see. Well, we can't just let this go.
Exactly. But what should we do?
How about we invite Julia and Richard to our next meeting with the planner?
What? And from there, we talked through our strategy over the phone. All right. I'm gonna make sure Julia regrets messing around with us like that. With a newfound determination, I hung up the phone, feeling completely different than when I had called. And then the day of our wedding planning meeting arrived.
Why did you call us here, huh? We're busy, you know.
Julia and her fiancé, Richard, were clearly annoyed at being summoned to the church office. We wanted to talk about you copying our entire wedding plan. I looked at the two of them calmly.
I told you already. We don't have time, so we're borrowing your ideas.
Exactly. That plan isn't suitable for marrying a high school grad anyway. So maybe you should have a more low-key wedding.
Seeing the two sitting smugly in their chairs, Tom and I decided to provoke them just a bit. This wedding plan was created for us. It suits us, and I think everyone will be happy.
Exactly. This is the result of us planning a ceremony that reflects who we are at this historic church.
As expected, Julia and Richard burst out laughing at our words.
A ceremony suitable for a high school grad? By the way, does your fiancé even have a real job, sis?
Yeah, I was wondering about that. What kind of work does a high school grad even do?
As the two laughed crudely, Tom replied calmly.
To put it simply, I help out with the family business.
Helping with the family business? You mean like housework?
Julia exaggeratedly pulled back, looking shocked. She then leaned into Richard, and they both started giggling.
I knew it. He's just a high school grad with barely any work experience.
Well, Julia made the right choice picking me, an elite. But your sister clearly doesn't know any better, marrying someone unemployed.
No matter how rude they got, neither Tom nor I were bothered. If anything, considering what was coming next, we were happy for them to keep going.
I do work as a proper member of society, you know.
When Tom smiled politely, Julia and Richard became even more smug.
Helping out around the house isn't a real job, you know. Understand? We, the intellectual leaders, are the ones keeping society going, and you're just a burden.
We're intellectual leaders, so we didn't know there were people like you. who are practically the poster child of being a burden. So glad we're on the right side.
We, as intellectual leaders, would have never interacted with someone like you if not for this wedding making us family.
It's really a problem having a non-intellectual leader as a relative. I'd never want anything to do with a high school grad.
Exactly, being related to intellectual leaders should be an association purely among intellectual leaders, for intellectual leaders, by intellectual leaders.
Julia and Richard were so hyped up that I lost track of what they were even saying. Ugh. I've heard the phrase intellectual leader so many times it's starting to lose all meaning. The moment I held my head in my hands, heavy footsteps echoed behind us.
What a disgrace, using such repulsive words. I'm ashamed of you, even as my daughter.
Dad.
Julia turned around, startled by the voice.
Why are you here, Dad?
Tom and I asked him to come. We wanted him to see how you and Richard were acting. I thought they might settle down now, but Julia and Richard were still going strong.
Perfect timing. Dad, did you know my Catherine's fiancé is a high school grad? Oh, and this is my fiancé, Richard, a graduate from a university exclusively for intellectual leaders. First time meeting him, right?
Nice to meet you, sir. I'm Richard, graduate of an intellectual leaders only university. We'll be getting married at this church a week before Catherine, so please keep that in mind.
Richard greeted him with a smirk, and my dad's face twisted into a deep frown.
So, you're the one Julia chose. Ah, it's a pity, but I suppose you two are a perfect match. Even thinking that is disappointing.
Hey, Dad. What do you mean, disappointing? If anything, Catherine is the disappointing one.
Exactly. Your daughter is marrying an unemployed high school grad. How could anything be more disappointing than that?
Facing Julia and Richard, who still weren't giving up, my usually calm father raised his voice with a stern expression.
Stop calling Tom a high school grad and unemployed.
Julia was a bit intimidated by Dad's anger, but her stubborn nature wouldn't let her back down.
We're not saying anything wrong. Someone who only helps out around the house has no future. Even planning a wedding is audacious.
So, you're trying to ruin her wedding by copying everything?
Wait. How do you know about that?
It seemed like Julia wanted to keep the fact that she was copying our wedding a secret. Julia glared at me, but I wasn't scared anymore. I told Dad, it's something that affects Tom's reputation more than mine.
What does the reputation of an unemployed high school grad even matter?
It was my dad who finally lost his patience with Julia continuing to insult Tom.
That's enough. How dare you insult such a capable person as unemployed or a high school grad? Do you not know Tom's position?
Huh? Isn't he just helping around the house?
To not even know the difference between helping with a family business and housework. No, more importantly, Tom isn't just helping with the family business. He's the head of it.
Oh, really? What kind of family business is it? Some farm or something?
It's this very church you're standing in.
My dad's shout seemed to fly right over Julia and Richard's heads, as they just stared blankly.
Huh? What? What about this church?
I'm saying Tom is the head priest of this church. I spoke clearly so that even Julia and Richard could understand the reality of the situation.
What? A head priest is like super important.
Julia shouted, and Richard began to panic too.
How can a high school grad be the head of a church?
Seeing Richard use awkwardly formal speech with Tom, it seemed like he finally understood Tom's position. To make sure they really got it, I began explaining in detail. This church is a historic one, right? Tom was destined to inherit it from birth. Tom, standing beside me with a sheepish smile, added,
When I was in high school, we had a series of family losses, and I had to take over sooner than expected. That's why my education stopped after high school.
Wait. Don't you need some kind of qualifications to work at a church? I know that much.
Julia, still trying to find something to criticize, made a smug face. But Tom calmly continued his explanation.
Yes, to get my qualification at the seminary at the youngest possible age in my teens. I spent 2 years studying at a training center, living there full-time.
Huh? Seminary, what?
Julia and Richard had question marks floating all around their heads, but Tom continued speaking without concern.
To enter the training center, I needed a letter of recommendation and proof that I had the equivalent academic skills of a college graduate. So I took the high school equivalency exam at 18.
Huh? High school equiv. What now?
I was thoroughly fed up with these self-proclaimed elites who still seemed confused. In other words, Tom had the academic skills of a college graduate at just 18. He's an incredibly capable person. Get it?
Oh, wow. That's amazing. It's such an honor to have someone like that as my brother-in-law.
Richard quickly changed his tune, while beside him, Julia ground her teeth in frustration.
But working at a church must be easy, right? You're still beneath us intellectual leaders.
Julia, you're still saying that?
Trying to get the last word, Julia received an earful from Dad.
Tom is doing an excellent job as the head priest of this historic church, and our company has often relied on him. And you. All these disrespectful comments.
Standing in front of my father, who was trembling with anger, Julia still muttered, But. Ignoring Julia, Dad turned to Tom and bowed.
Tom, please forgive my daughter's rudeness. I promise that Julia will not be allowed near this church again. You have my word.
What? Wait a minute. We're having our wedding here.
Of course, I'll take responsibility and make sure it's canceled.
Dad spoke clearly, silencing Julia, who looked like she was about to throw a fit. Seeing that, Tom nodded and said, Yeah, I suppose so.
Well, Julia and her fiancé Richard didn't seem to want anything to do with me as a high school graduate. So maybe that's for the best. I'm sure neither of you would want to hold a ceremony at a church run by a high school grad.
With a cheerful smile, Tom made his point, and Julia finally seemed to understand the situation.
No way. I'm going to have a better wedding than Catherine here. I've already bragged about it to my friends. No way.
Julia stomped her feet in frustration. There were no words to describe her behavior other than pathetic.
Give it up. It was wrong for your mother and me to give in every time you threw a tantrum.
Come on, Julia's crying. Can't you just let us have our wedding here? Having relatives like us with impressive backgrounds would be a plus for the church's reputation.
Richard approached Dad, rubbing his hands together, but Dad glared at him sharply.
What plus? It's nothing but a minus.
Eek.
How is this acceptable? Not only did you not inform us of the wedding, but you showed up with a smug smile and said, "We'll be getting married here, so please remember that." Unbelievable.
Realizing that tears wouldn't sway Dad, Julia stopped crying and began making excuses.
But we decided to get married suddenly, and we were busy. I don't really understand proper greetings.
With her lips pouting, making excuses, Julia received a harsh look from Dad.
That's enough. I don't need relatives with no common sense who just want to throw around the term intellectual leaders. Julia, I've decided to cut ties with you.
Julia forced a stiff smile at Dad's sudden declaration.
What? Come on, Dad, that's a bit much for a joke.
You think I'd say something like this as a joke? Take a good look at yourself all alone and think about how terribly you've treated others.
Hearing Dad's declaration, Julia and Richard turned pale and began to panic.
No, you can't do that, Dad. I love being known as the daughter of the CEO who graduated from an intellectual leaders-only university.
I don't care. Isn't that husband of yours also one of those so-called intellectual leaders? Why don't you try boasting as the wife of an intellectual leader next?
Dad turned away with a dismissive snort, and Richard turned even paler.
We're in trouble, Julia. I quit my job because I thought I was marrying into a rich family, with your dad being a CEO. If we're disowned, I'll be unemployed.
You've got to be kidding me. I just announced I'd be a stay-at-home wife after we got married. I've already completed the resignation paperwork.
Julia and Richard began shouting at each other, and we just watched them blankly. They really didn't think this through at all. I said in disbelief, and Tom nodded gently.
Like a catapult, those two just launched themselves.
Tom, that's kind of a confusing metaphor. In the end, Julia and Richard were escorted away by my angry father, still yelling. As for Tom and me, we were able to have our ideal wedding at the church where Tom served as head priest, just as planned. We were overjoyed, especially since our relatives and friends complimented the beautiful ceremony and enjoyed it. Of course, my sister Julia was not in attendance. After being dragged around by her whims for so long, I honestly felt relieved to be free. Apparently, Julia and Richard, despite their fancy academic backgrounds, were struggling to find new jobs due to their sky-high pride. One day, I received a call from Julia, who seemed desperate. "Hello."
Oh. You finally picked up. Sis, could you lend me some money? We're really struggling to make ends meet. I'll pay you back soon, promise.
Talking quickly, Julia sounded like she hadn't given up her extravagant lifestyle even after losing her job. "Oh, really? Begging for help from me, a high school grad and someone who chose a high school grad? Julia, where's your pride?" I replied confidently, and Julia stammered, trying to make excuses.
Come on. I didn't know Tom was a capable guy, even if he's a high school grad. Look, I'm sorry. You must be well off as the wife of a head priest, right? So just a little bit.
Deciding that this was the perfect time to say my piece, I cleared my throat and took a deep breath. Stop saying such pathetic things. If you want to call yourself an intellectual leader, then bite down on a rock if you have to, find a job, and work hard to contribute to society. I heard Julia gasp on the other end of the phone. Satisfied with that, I hung up. Since then, I haven't heard from Julia at all. Tom and I are busy every day working to protect the church. Tom, who serves as the head priest, is gentle and sometimes a bit clueless, but he's incredibly impressive. I've also started attending college to earn a seminary qualification so I can support him properly. Our days are quite busy, but working hard toward our goals makes life fulfilling and full of happiness.